A Brief History of the Troop. 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry, written by Assistant Curator Joseph Seymour for ArmyHistory.org. During the Revolutionary War, the militia of the several states provided trained soldiers and officers to the Continental Army, maintained state organizations that could augment the National Army on the day of the battle, and form a home guard to secure non-combat zones, guard prisoners and garrison depots, forts, and other military installations. Militia units also stood ready to defend their state against sudden enemy attack. Readiness was certainly on the minds of the 28 Philadelphians who organized the Philadelphia Light Horse, the forerunner of the 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry, on 17 November 1774. The First Continental Congress had recently adjourned, and everywhere that fall, revolutionary councils known as Committees of Safety had begun to mobilize the military resources for a potential war with England. The troop took shape throughout the winter of 1774 and the early spring of 1775 in preparation for a reconnaissance role. The sabers, horse pistols, and carbines that the troop selected allowed them to fight both mounted and dismounted. Several members of the troop were merchants and importers who knew the navigable waterways and roads surrounding their city. Others belonged to the Gloucester Hunt, a local fox hunting club. Fox hunters knew the terrain and were used to covering it on horseback. In order to hone their martial skills, the troop hired a fencing master and a riding instructor. A trumpeter was also hired for signaling. The weeks following the battles of Lexington and Concord were a very busy time for the military in Philadelphia. In addition to the Light Horse, 3 battalions of foot and 1 artillery battalion were organized in training in Philadelphia. The Committee of Safety fortified the Delaware River at the soon-to-be-renamed Fort Mifflin. Shipwrights were busy building a small navy. On a national scale, revolutionary leaders such as Benjamin Franklin, Silas Deane, and John Adams met in committee to outfit the newly formed Continental Army, then stationed in Boston. On a more local scale, troopers such as Samuel Morris, James Meese, and Samuel Howell Jr. helped mobilize their city for the war. There was a great need for combat-ready soldiers, and so the troop expanded. On 16 March 1776, 5 new troopers were elected. The troop now had 40 members ready to take the field. In the spring of 1776, the war shifted from Boston to New York. The troops spent that spring and summer delivering important news and payroll to the Army in the field. In July, Lieutenant John Dunlop printed the first copies of the Declaration of Independence. In November 1776, troopers answered Pennsylvania's calls for soldiers in the wake of the fall of New York City. The troop reached New Jersey in time to cover the main army's retreat. On 25 December, the troop forded the icy Delaware River on horseback during the famous crossing. The next day, at the Battle of Trenton, the troop stayed close to the action throughout the battle, but suffered no casualties. Following Washington's victory, the troop recrossed the Delaware with the main army. On December 30th, 1776, Colonel Joseph Reed led a 12-man detachment of the troop in the vicinity of Princeton. The patrol captured a body of the 16th Light Dragoons. The British prisoners informed Reed that General Cornwallis had reinforced Princeton and was on the march toward Trenton with the main body of the British Army. This important mission provided Washington with the intelligence he needed to win the Battle of Princeton. The troop fought under Pennsylvania Militia Brigadier General John Armstrong at the battles of Brandywine and Germantown. Troopers pledged significant funds to financier Robert Morris's Bank of North America and continued to sit on various committees throughout the war to help manage vital wartime production. One trooper established a brewery in Baltimore, Maryland, for the purpose of supplying American and French forces with beer, an important 18th century ration. Following the war, the troop continued to train and grow. Several former Continental Army officers joined the troop at this time, including notable veterans such as Colonels Christian Febiger, Samuel Miles, and Thomas Proctor. Although Febiger and Miles would later rise to the troop captaincy, all initially enlisted in the troop as privates. On March 8th, 1792, the troop's Revolutionary War veterans voted to donate $8,000 to fund a foundling hospital in Philadelphia, known today as the Pennsylvania Hospital. In 1798, Trooper Robert Wharton and several troopers organized a second troop of horse in the city, which helped to escort prisoners of war during the quasi-war with France. That year, Trooper William Ward Burroughs resigned from the troop to accept command of the United States Marine Corps. During the War of 1812, the troops stood ready to defend Philadelphia from British attack. The successful defense of Fort McHenry and the repulse of British regulars at the Battle of North Point near Baltimore made such a defense unnecessary. Nevertheless, the troop took to the field with the rest of the Pennsylvania militia. The troop contributed officers and men to the United States Army during the Mexican War and helped quell civil disturbances in the decades leading up to the Civil War. In 1853, the troop built its first armory. In peace and war, readiness remained an all-important aspect of the troop's training ethos. In May 1861, President Abraham Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers for 3-month service. The troop fought at Falling Water, an early action in the Civil War, before mustering out in August. Younger troopers furnished cadre for the 6th Pennsylvania Volunteer Cavalry. Organized 18 June 1863 at Philadelphia and better known as Rush's Lancers, the 6th Pennsylvania amassed a commendable service record during the war. The older members of the troop continued to drill as the 1st City Troop, Pennsylvania Militia. As an organization, the troop fought at Wrightsville, Pennsylvania and Gettysburg. Several other members of the troop also served in the 2nd Pennsylvania Volunteer Cavalry. At least one trooper, Joseph Penrose Ashe, accepted a commission in the 5th United States Cavalry. Ashe was later killed leading troops at Spotsylvania. Following the Civil War, the troop continued to lend its experience and expertise to the city, Commonwealth, and nation. As had been the case following the Revolutionary War, veteran officers joined the troop's ranks as privates, while others left the unit to take commissions elsewhere. Jonathan Williams Biddle resigned from the troop on 2 October 1876 to accept a 2nd lieutenant commission in the 7th United States Cavalry. Biddle was killed in action alongside the Yellowstone River on 30 September 1877. At an 1896 rifle match, the troop scored highest among the 3 troops comprising the 1st Pennsylvania Cavalry. In 1897, the governor of Pennsylvania ordered the troop to the Pennsylvania coal fields to maintain peace during a coal miners' strike. The troop served in Puerto Rico during the Spanish-American War and on the Mexican border in 1916. Within a few months of its return from the Mexican border, the troop again entered federal service. The United States had declared war on Germany. Many troopers held college degrees and were in high demand as officer candidates. 56 troopers were commissioned in 1917 alone, many serving in the 79th Division, which organized at Camp Meade, Maryland. During World War I, the remaining troopers fought in France as the 103rd Trench Mortar Battery. The troop concentrated at Camp Hancock near Augusta, Georgia, for training along with other elements of the newly redesignated 28th Division. One of the oldest trainers present was the troop's trumpeter, Ellis Pugh. Pugh had received his baptism of fire during the Civil War and joined the troop in 1874. Considered too old for service during the Spanish-American War, Pugh volunteered once again in 1917, drawing on over 50 years of military experience to train young Army musicians. Following the war, the troop reorganized as a troop of horse cavalry. On 23 September 1940, the troop, then designated as Headquarters Troop 52nd Cavalry Brigade, was reorganized and redesignated as Troop A, 104th Cavalry Regiment, Horse Mechanized, and assigned to 2nd Corps. One horse mechanized regiment was assigned to each of the 9 Army Corps. As the name implies, horse mechanized regiments used horse trailers and other motorized vehicles to transport cavalry to the forward battle areas, as well as to support them when they got there. Inducted into federal service on 17 February 1941 in Philadelphia, the troop departed on 1 March 1941, having cleared a foot of snow from in and around the horse trailers. By nightfall, the troop had arrived at its new training area, the Pennsylvania Military Reservation at Fort Indiantown Gap. The troop remained at Fort Indiantown Gap until 25 September 1941, when it departed for the North Carolina maneuvers to act as the opposing force for the 1st Armored Division. With training completed, the troop returned to Indiantown Gap by 9 December. On 9 April 1942, horses were exchanged for motorcycles and jeeps. On 16 April 1942, the troop departed Fort Indiantown Gap for Philadelphia, where it provided security for vital installations and lend-lease material along the Delaware River waterfront. Shortly after its arrival in Philadelphia, approximately 50% of the troop's enlisted personnel left for officer candidacy school. As in World War I, the Army sought qualified officer candidates, and once again, the 1st City Troop provided its share. By the following September, the turnover was 100%. Most of the 55 troopers who left the organization in 1942 were assigned to the 166th Field Artillery Regiment, the 28th Division, and other elements of the 104th Cavalry. By the end of 1943, Not one pre-war trooper remained on the rolls of Troop A. During the war, 271 troopers served in every branch of the military. Most served in the Army, with one member, Charles S. Cheston, attaining the rank of Brigadier General. The troop additionally supplied 32 officers to the Navy, 6 officers to the Marine Corps, and 1 officer to the Coast Guard. One trooper even became a war correspondent. On 17 November 1942, Troop A arrived at Camp Jackson, South Carolina. There, it was reassigned to 12th Corps, 2nd Army. On 6 January 1943, the troop arrived at Salem, Oregon, where it patrolled the Pacific coastline. With the reorganization of the 104th Cavalry into a group, the troop was again reorganized and redesignated, becoming Troop A, 104th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron Mechanized on 1st of January 1944. From Oregon, the troop departed for California, where it patrolled the beaches from Malibu to Point Conception and trained in marksmanship and commando tactics. In June 1944, the troop entrained for Camp Polk, Louisiana, and from there, the New York port of embarkation. The troop arrived at St. Valery, France in March 1945. On 2 April 1945, the troop entered the area of operation, serving in the line as infantry between the 44th Infantry Division and the French troops. The troops suffered several casualties before the end of hostilities on 8 May 1945. Following VE Day, the troop moved to Marseille, France for shipment to the Philippines. News of Japan's surrender was received en route, and the ship changed course for New York City. Reorganized and redesignated on 1 December 1948 as a 28th Reconnaissance Company, the troop mobilized during the Korean War for service in Germany. 2 troopers from the 1950s who went on to lead distinguished military careers were Nicholas Sellers and Charles P. Pete Conrad, Jr. Sellers served with the unit for several years as an enlisted soldier before accepting a commission to the United States Army Reserve. He later served as an advisor for the Army of the Republic of Vietnam and the United States Army Special Forces before retiring as a lieutenant colonel. Conrad enlisted in the troop in 1949. In 1955, he graduated from the United States Navy's Pensacola Air Training Center and subsequently entered the space program. Conrad, commander of the Apollo 12 mission and the third man to walk on the moon in November 1969, received his initial military training in the troop. Known as Troop A, 1st Squadron, 104th Cavalry since 1 April 1975, troopers currently form an element of the 2nd Infantry Brigade Combat Team, 28th Infantry Division. Since 2002, the troop has deployed to Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Egypt, and elsewhere. Today, current troopers and veterans of the Troop A, 1st Squadron, 104th Cavalry Regiment lend their experience and expertise, continuing a tradition of providing a trained, experienced force to the Army.